And welcome to the Access Voice. Today I've got a guest in. Her name is Emma Hallam, and she is the co-founder of Leicestershire-based charity Alex's Wish. So welcome, Emma, to the Access Voice.
So
Emma, first of all, if you want to go ahead and tell us a bit about yourself and tell our viewers.
Sure. Okay. So I'm Emma Hallam. I co-founder, as you said, of Alex's Wish. We're a local Leicestershire-based charity. And ultimately, the charity is about raising as much money as we can do to fund medical research and clinical trials to bring about effective treatments and ultimately a cure for Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy. Rich, you've got a Becker's muscular dystrophy, so any treatments that we do have will be eligible for yourself as well. So yeah, it's basically raising money for Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy. And the reason why I set up Alex's Wish is because my son, who's called Alex, was diagnosed with Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy 2 weeks before his 4th birthday, back in 2010. And ultimately, we were told at the time of diagnosis that there were no treatments and certainly no cure. There was some work being done on the horizon, but not very much funding was actually being raised at that time. So sort of fast forward on a couple of years to late 2012, I decided to set up a charity to raise awareness of the condition and to raise as much funding as we can do for Duchenne, with the ultimate aim really of bringing about effective treatments to help slow down the muscle wasting for this generation of boys, and there are some girls that have got it as well. So it's predominantly a boy condition because it's X chromosomal abnormality, but some girls do actually have it as well. I carry the gene and therefore I pass the gene on to Alex, but I didn't know that I was a carrier. So yeah, it's raising awareness and ultimately raising as much money as we can do for Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy to help all children living with the condition. We set ourselves a goal initially to raise £1 million, which was ridiculous at the time and everyone thought I was crazy. But I was really pleased to say that sort of back end of last year, we hit that target. And that's down to the fantastic supporters that we've had over the years, including yourself, Rich, as being ambassador of Alex's Wish. So yeah, we're now on to raising the next million as quickly as we can.
Brilliant. Yeah, and obviously being involved in the charity myself has been fantastic for me to see the growth from even in the last sort of 5 years, 4 or 5 years since I've been involved. It has really evolved and loads more people have been coming on board and really supporting the work that obviously you're doing and Duchenne UK and the various other charities and treatment companies. So in terms of like before Alex was diagnosed, what were your experiences of kind of the disability world before that? Did you have any experience?
Not really. My uncle had a disability, but he died when I was 3. I know he was in a wheelchair, so I kind of was familiar with some disabilities, but not really that exposed to it before Alex was diagnosed with Duchenne. So for me, entering a whole world of potential disability, which I knew was going to happen with Alex's condition. So when he was diagnosed, he was still able to, and still is able to walk and take part in sports activities and what have you. So for me, knowing that my son at the age of 4 had a disability took a lot, in terms of getting my head around the situation and knowing that his condition was just going to get worse and that ultimately Alex would need a wheelchair. Maybe even before he was 10 years old. So trying to get my head around going from non-disability to having a disability in a very short space of time was really daunting, really, in terms of what that future was going to hold. And at first, when Alex was diagnosed, I thought it was all very negative. That, seeing Alex potentially going into a wheelchair, I saw it as not being able to do so many things that Alex won't be able to do. And I think, it's a case of seeing disabilities as almost kind of like a negative at the time, but I see disabilities as completely different now, completely different, as I've obviously met many people with disabilities over the years, and seen what they're able to achieve and what they're able to do. And it's not almost, I don't like people being called disability, they're having a disability, because I think it's quite a negative word in itself.
And it's quite a big thing, isn't it, in terms of that thing about ability and about how really before kind of you enter that world, you kind of have, everybody has this view of disability, and it can be negative, it can be positive, but I think once you actually get into that world and actually experience it, you do actually realize that disability is actually kind of you feel it's kind of a negative thing about it, because actually we've all got so many abilities, and once you start looking a bit deeper and start exploring kind of those abilities, you start to just kind of see it in a different way. So what are your experiences of kind of access as a family? So how does access affect your family on a day-to-day basis?
Well, as I said earlier, Alex is still able to walk, which is amazing because he's 13 now. So we didn't anticipate that Alex would still be walking at this age. But just because he's walking, it doesn't mean to say that he finds it easy. Any uneven ground or any stairs or elevation can be very difficult for Alex, because if he's going uphill, he has to arch his back, and that's basically because of the muscle weakness within his legs and also within his hips. So he has to walk differently, which puts a lot of pressure on the lower back. So he finds kind of going up hills, walking long distances, walking anywhere that's, you know, sort of cobbly or pebbly, because it means that he struggles. So for him, walking on a very flat, hard surface is far more ideal. So going into shops or shopping centres or anywhere like restaurants or parks and play areas, theatres, anything like that poses potential problems for us. So Alex is a big fan and loves going to watch the Leicester Tigers. I mean, Leicester Tigers have been fantastic, by the way, in terms of making sure that he's got a seat that's very accessible. So whilst he is able to get up to some stairs, what he can't do is actually walk up any stairs that hasn't got a railing. So they've made sure that wherever he can sit has actually got a railing so that he can actually access that area. But it is evolving for us as a family, because with Duchenne, it's a constant decline. So therefore, you know, we're kind of almost preparing ahead now. We've got a power chair on we should be getting in the next couple of months, a new power chair, and we're also buying a big sort of van to make sure we can get the chair inside the van as well, because we're finding it more and more difficult for Alex when we go on family holidays or days out and trips. He does need a chair to actually get around. So, you know, it's kind of fairly limited with our need at the moment, but we know that that's going to evolve and grow and develop. So
when
it's never changing beast.
Sorry, when you mentioned about Leicester Tigers, so I presume that makes a huge difference when you go somewhere and they actually put you kind of just actually take into account what's going on and actually just say, right, we're going to do this. We're not going to you're not going to not watch the rugby. We're just going to kind of adapt things for you. Which I think is a good attitude for all kind of businesses to take on. You know, you don't have to like sort of change the dynamics of your business, but you might just have to make a small adaptation that can make the world of difference to somebody else. Like the small people think they have to make these big changes, but you don't actually.
You don't. I think it's just for Alex. We were sort of we're in a good viewing area, so we're not in the sort of disabled area because he's not in a chair. But it just means that, you know, he's given seating where as soon as you come out sort of the main entrance and you go up a few flights, you know, a few stairs, there's a railing there, so he can just hold himself up on the railings and then quite easily sit on the first chair that's available. So it's just making, sometimes I think it's just trying to get round the barriers and just make people aware of the requirements that you need, and just being really explicit and asking if they can help and support you. So we've seen that in a very positive way, of, you know, like Alex's school, for instance. He's in mainstream school, he's not in a specialist school, and they've been fantastic, sort of working around, giving me a lift pass, making sure that classrooms are more accessible for him. So where there is a classroom upstairs where there's no lift facility, they'll bring that classroom downstairs. So it's just, and also giving him time before the lessons and after the lessons, actually allowing him to get into a lesson early and actually leave a lesson a little bit early as well, so that he's not in with the crowds. So it's just sitting down with, you know, the Senko within school and actually explaining what Alex's needs are and where he finds the challenges, so that we can come up with different ideas and kind of break down any barriers that are preventing him from getting on with his normal everyday living. So they're kind of minor adjustments, but they make a huge amount of difference.
And
to children like Alex.
communication as well was important, isn't
Yes,
it? Like, you know,
definitely.
in terms of actually communicating the needs, it makes things easier for other people to then implement things.
Yes,
Because what I
because it's
found,
like, yeah, sorry.
what I found with me was that, you know, until I started communicating in a more kind of positive way and in a way that kind of was assisting other people, that was when things started to happen and I could do more. But when I
Yeah,
wasn't giving them that information, they didn't know what to do. And
I
I
don't know
think
how to
you have to
help.
get it out there, don't you?
And I think we're going to be transitioning from me being Alex's mum and doing all of this for him to him actually having the confidence to be able to do it himself. So that's the transition period that we're in. Alex is 13 now, so I'm still obviously caring for all his needs and making sure that he gets what he needs. But going into sort of late teenage years, he's going to have that skill set himself and actually be able to be confident enough to ask for support and help where it's needed. Because like you say, I think until you walk in someone's shoes, you don't know exactly what they need. And it's kind of, as a abled person, you can't always sort of make sure that you cater for every single need that they need.
No.
So you need feedback from the person that needs the help to say exactly what it is that they're struggling with and how we can support them and aid them.
And you know, when you go out and about, like sort of say if you're going on a holiday or you're going kind of just out for the day, you know, is there much pre-planning you have to do? Are there any concerns that Alex has before he goes out and things like that?
Definitely. Not so much so. I'd say before he was 11 years old, not so much so, but now definitely. Certainly, I mean, we're booking, well, we were supposed to be going to Florida this year, but that's not happening due to coronavirus. So we're reorganizing that for next year. But going to somewhere like Florida is a big thing. It's making sure that we have the disability access into the properties, making sure that there isn't a tiny little step somewhere in case Alex by that point is in a wheelchair, because from our point of view, he's able to walk now, but we don't know. So when we're planning for next year, we don't know whether Alex will still be able to walk next year.
Yeah.
So this is what we're having to think about as a family, is making sure not only that we're catering for his current needs, but what will his needs be like in a year or 2 years' time. So it's thinking ahead and thinking around that. So even little things like having just a little step could stop him from having his power chair being able to go in and outside the property.
Yeah.
And it's making sure that the parks that we go to, that he's got wheelchair access, and you know, making sure before we get there that we've done all the research to make sure that everything is accessible. Because what you don't want to do is have your children, you know, sort of excited about going along to a park to actually get there and say, well, actually now we can't access it. So it's just making sure that you pre-plan absolutely everything. Yeah. And even, you know, getting on a flight as well, because Alex broke his hip about 4 years ago now. And so he did go into a wheelchair for a short period of time. And we'd actually had a trip to Spain booked, and we thought it would be still good for him to go because of the vitamin D and what it would do for his bone health. So we still went, but suddenly we had to get wheelchair access onto an aeroplane, and we realized actually that we had to carry Alex onto the aeroplane. So we were able to get a lift up to the entrance of the plane, but from there on in we couldn't actually get a wheelchair in. So we had to pick him up and actually walk him down, which was really quite tricky to do. Obviously, if you're in a wheelchair, then you know that can be very challenging, because at the time Alex was only 9 years old. So it was quite easy to carry. But if he was now 13 and is now 9 stone, that would be somewhat more difficult to do. So it is a kind of a scary world that we're entering into in terms of being able to access flights. And you also hear, you know, stories in terms of taking your power chair, and by the time you get to the country, you know, the other country that you've flown out to, there's a bit missing on the power chair, or something's broken. And suddenly that's what you use for your legs in terms of your transportation. So being in a foreign country and not having the chair is very scary and quite daunting. So,
you know, like, because say children don't have that voice, well, you know, that majority of adults say have, in terms of actually getting their opinions out there and stuff. Do you think they end up as kind of the forgotten part of disability in some ways, in terms of like when people are fixing venues, they're not thinking about the fact that it could actually be a disabled child they're actually fixing a venue for or putting a ramp in for? It's not just that kind of, it's like I find disability can sometimes seem very adult, but actually it's affecting lots of children.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's again, it's down to raising awareness, isn't it, in terms of making sure that people appreciate that there is people with various disabilities. Um, and just obviously just requesting that or making sure that is the case before you book tickets to a venue or, you know, a concert or whatever it might be. Even going to the cinema, you know, it's making sure, because there aren't very many disabled sort of spots really where you can actually put a wheelchair within a cinema. And once those spots have been taken, then obviously you can't go in.
Yeah.
So it's just thinking and forward planning and asking those questions. But I would say you can't ever assume anything. It's always double checked, because the last thing you want to do is get to a place and be disappointed, because I think then it just highlights the disability even more. Certainly being a child as well, because, you know, you get so excited about going to places that if you then get there and decide, you know, they can't even enter the building, then it would be a huge disappointment to them. So it's just, I think we've got to forward plan, unfortunately, and think ahead of the game and ask the right questions and just make sure that, you know, we are able to access all the areas that we need.
And do you think does Alex kind of like do you notice those anxieties from him? Do you see, does he now he's 13, even though he's obviously only 13, but do you start seeing those anxieties, those worries, those questions that perhaps he didn't used to ask, and now he's getting a little bit worked up and things? Because I can imagine that's probably starting to get on his mind.
Yeah, I think the worst thing for Alex at the moment is falling over. So as I mentioned earlier, that if he's on the flat ground, he's less likely to fall over. But as soon as he hits anything that makes his stature sort of almost a little bit wobbly, his knee can go in straight away. And once that happens, he's on the floor within seconds. So there's no prior warning, oh, I'm going to fall. He just falls straight away. And he finds falling over really, really embarrassing, because he doesn't like the fuss. So if anyone says, oh, Alex, are you okay? He's like, get off me, let me get up on my own. So it's more, he's more embarrassed when that happens, when that situation happens, really. So I think in his head, he's always thinking, I don't want to fall over, I don't want to fall over. And so when we do go to places, that is kind of his foremost thing in his mind. I mean, we've even been in restaurants and just getting to a table and he's suddenly just fallen over. And he literally does not want any fuss. He even doesn't want, you know, any help to get up. He'll just get up on himself. And just sort of say, leave it, don't speak about it, I don't want to mention it. So he's definitely aware of it, which is why now we've bought him a power chair, so that, you know, he can go along to places and not have that worry. He is very conscious. I think certainly being at school, he doesn't like to be in a wheelchair at school, because he doesn't want people to look at him and say, Alex has got a disability. He just wants to blend in with everybody else. And so he's becoming more aware of his disability and more aware of, like, for instance, going to school if it's been frosty. You know, to him that's a nightmare, because he thinks, I'm going to fall over. I know I'm going to fall over. It's just a matter of when. And so he's worried and he's conscious about that happening. So I do feel for him in that regard. It almost would be easier if he did go into a chair, but we don't want to sort of, you know, get him into a chair too soon, because it's really important that he stays mobile for as long as he can.
Yeah. And what do you think would help access, like, for people? Obviously, we've talked about the app that obviously Access Ratings brought out, that I'm obviously involved in.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the stuff you've said today, like, shows that there's a lot of positive things that happen, but there's, like, for example, at the Tigers, but there's also a lot of negative things that can happen and a lot of frustrations that are needed to vent. So let's just have a quick chat about Access Rating. So in terms of the Access Rating app and being able to have somewhere where you can submit reviews and ratings from an access perspective, is that something that you're going to be using? I mean, I know Alex has already been submitting ratings that I've seen.
Yes, he has.
What's his response been to all that type of thing?
He thinks it's great. I think the more tools we have available to us, the more kind of reassurances we can give ourselves before we actually get to a venue. Again, avoiding that disappointment of getting somewhere and going, actually, we said we wanted to go here, but we can't. Yeah. So for us, yeah, fantastic. I mean, we went to London for a weekend last year. And it was more our naivety, again, because we're not used to the disability side of things with Alex, because he's kind of through a transition point. When we got to London, you know, accessing the tubes and accessing public transport and, you know, getting to a place that we wanted to go to and realizing that actually, you know, we're going to struggle because there's not enough points of where he can sit down and have a rest, which for Alex is really important. So because he's not in a wheelchair, yes, he can walk, but he needs to rest regularly. And it's just having, you know, those rest points in between certain places as well. So for us, if it could include things like transportation as well, that would be really helpful, because I think when you're quite new to disabilities, you don't have that experience of where to look and where to go. So for us, it's we're still learning and we're still growing in this area. So we don't have that experience. So if there is an app available, which obviously you guys have done, which is fantastic, the more information that we can populate that app with, the better it's going to be in the long run.
Yeah, and I think
so,
also,
yeah, I know there are disabled, you know, sort of accessibility websites available for holiday lettings,
yeah,
which is great. So I think more information like that, it makes our lives so much easier, because there is a lot of work involved in preparing yourself for a trip, or you know, a trip abroad in the UK, or you know, day trips, etc. You do need to look at accessibility. So with that app, I think it would just be so useful. So and I think also a lot of parents as well, I think you feel that you have to do a lot of campaigning, a lot of writing out to businesses to explain the difficulties that you've had, in the hope that they'll listen to you, and that your voice will be heard and they'll make changes. But unfortunately, some of that falls on deaf ears. So I think the application, you know, the app that you've got, is the more applications like that, hopefully more businesses will open their eyes and wake up to the fact that, you know, they need to consider disabilities and make sure everything's accessible for everybody, despite what disability or ability they have.
And it's that like combined power, isn't it, of like the community. Like the communities are very, once you get involved in it, you realise how passionate and strong it is. And actually, you know, we're a very sort of determined community, and you know, if we see something that's not right, we do all kind of work group together to try and make that change, because we just know like the impact it has on children and obviously adults and everyone, in terms of just the enjoyment of everyday life. It can just make days so much more just so much more frustrating if you don't have those access things in place.
I mean, I think also as well, in the current climate with the lockdown, I think a lot of people are appreciating how it feels not to be able to go out and do various things. And I think with disability, sometimes it can have that constantly, in terms of that's not available to me, that's not open to me, I can't take part in this, I can't take part in that. So there tends to be a lot of things that you can't do. And I think that's really frustrating, but it doesn't just happen for a period of time, it's for the whole life. So the more companies and venues open up to this, the more, you know, families can enjoy what everyone should be enjoying. And I think in this day and age, we really should be, you know, looking at making sure everything is accessible for everybody. Just because, you know, why shouldn't somebody enjoy life just as much as everybody else, just because, you know, they're in a wheelchair or they have a certain disability? I think it's really important, definitely. Okay, so, and even I would love the fact that if businesses would actually spend a week in a chair themselves.
And some do. We have seen that happen, but it'd be good if more did, and more kind of got that experience of how it is, because I think having the experience of isolation, you know, it does relate to disability. And having the experience of like being in a chair or having to look at these and think about these access issues all the time, it certainly does make you look at things in a different way. So what would your advice be if you could kind of go back to when Alex is diagnosed and think now, okay, what advice would you give to a parent going into that?
For me, when Alex was diagnosed, obviously it came as a huge shock, because we didn't really have much time to get our heads around the whole situation. I think accept that it's a huge shock, accept that you're going to feel absolutely not have any control over the situation. It's going to be incredibly, it's just like the whole world just collapses around you, and it's to allow and give yourself that space to come to terms with the devastating, you know, news that you've received. Because I think for me, I think for me,
we'll edit that bit.
Okay. I can see you going, go away.
Okay, we can edit that bit.
Okay.
I'll just go back in and ask it again.
Okay.
So annoying. Okay. So with the access rating voice interviews, what we like to do is ask a really sort of she's messed it up now. Hold on, I'll start again. So what we like to do with the access voice interviews at the end is always ask a kind of question where you've got to really think. So got a question for you, Emma. So what would you say to families with children entering the world of disability? What would your message to those families be?
For me, when Alex was diagnosed, it was a devastating news that we received within such a short space of time. So if you imagine sort of on the Wednesday, we thought there was nothing wrong with our child, and by the Saturday we was told that Alex had got Duchenne. It was going to be in a wheelchair by the age of 10. You know, progressive muscle wasting, and the devastating sort of side effects of Duchenne. And for us, it was just like a bomb had gone off. And I think what we tried to do was take on too much information all at the same time, was trying to get our heads around absolutely everything rather than taking time to digest the information. And, you know, being kind to ourselves, I think is really, really important, is actually give yourself that time to get your head around the news and the, you know, what the future holds as well. For us, we tried to look too far ahead, and was like, what's going to happen to Alex when he reaches 10? What's going to happen to Alex when he reaches 20? It was almost thinking about the here and now, what this news meant for his future and for the rest of his life. And it was almost too much information to digest.
Yeah.
And it was just such an awful time. And I think looking back now, it's just take one step at a time. Almost, you know, let's focus on the next year rather than let's focus on the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Was really important, because we researched so much, which you do. Like, I think anything, if you get a condition, you Google it to the nth degree. You sit up all night kind of researching, trying to find out everything you can find out. And it was so much information. It was almost like overload. And I think if you can just take time over it and just be really kind to yourself and give yourself that time just to digest information bit by bit, that's what I would certainly tell myself. And also not to focus on all the things that we can't now do as a family, or we won't be able to do, because Alex is 13 and is still walking.
Yeah.
And we were worrying when he was 4 about him going into a wheelchair, and how would Alex feel like going into a wheelchair. But we didn't need to think about that, because he's 13 and he's still not in a wheelchair. And actually now Alex has had the time to digest and get his head around the situation, that now he's welcoming a wheelchair. And now we're seeing it as a positive thing. It's not a negative thing. But at the age of 4, you know, we thought it was just going to, you know, our lives were over, but it's not the case. So it's not to dwell on all the things that you can't do and actually absorb too much information, and to give yourself a bit of a break. And to spend time just being together as a family and thinking, you know, sometimes when things get really overwhelming for me, I take it right back to this. I say, is Alex okay today? Is he going to be okay tomorrow? And almost accept that and just think, right, we're living today. We've got plans for tomorrow. Let's not look too far ahead.
Yeah.
Because then it kind of brings you back to the here and now, and it brings you back to thinking, I don't have to worry about anything today. I don't have to worry about anything tomorrow. Because otherwise you're worrying about the future too much, and you're trying to worry about too many factors too soon, and you feel overwhelmed and, you know, powerless. So for us, the journey so far over the past 11 years has been really positive.
I suppose there's a lot of it just goes with all the barrier, because you have to overcome lots of different barriers, including access. You can't really you can't go at everything all in one go.
No.
You have to take things as they come. You have to learn a lot. You have to educate yourself a lot of things to enable you then to go out.
Yeah, by way of an example, when Alex was 4, when we first got when Alex was first diagnosed, we had to get ourselves around all the hospital appointments, what medication he needed, what physiotherapy he needed. But in the same time, was also worrying about, we need to move house. Our house isn't accessible. Oh my gosh, what about wheelchairs? And then we were even like looking at wheelchairs online, which, you know, we didn't need for another 10 years.
Yeah.
So it's almost like take things in bite-sized chunks and worry about what you absolutely need to worry about. Be mindful of the future, but just take your time with that, because it's too much otherwise. It's too much to take in. And then it's very, very stressful and very frightening world when you look at the whole picture.
Yeah.
It's kind of almost treat it as a jigsaw puzzle and actually go, right, I'm going to tackle this bit today or this next couple of months, and work on that first and actually build on it and reach out to other parents as well that are affected by the condition, because I think, again, they will reassure you that it's not as bad as you think it's going to be.
Yeah.
There are some amazing families out there doing some amazing things, and their children are having a great life. Yes, it's different to the one that we first thought it was going to be, but different doesn't have to be worse.
No. And to be honest, that is a fantastic little ending to our interview today. It's been a pleasure to have you with us today, Emma, and we will be back on the Access Voice very soon with more guests just as good as Emma. So look forward to seeing you then, and we will see you soon. Take care.